Nobody talks about what happens in the week after you quit. Not the motivational version, not the highlight reel, the actual week. The one where you wake up at 7 a.m. out of habit, reach for your phone expecting a calendar full of meetings, and find nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, something strange happens. You don't feel free, you feel exposed. That feeling? That's not a mistake. That's not a signal to go back. That's the exact sensation of a cage door opening from the inside. And the reason it feels like danger instead of freedom is because your nervous system can't tell the difference. It was trained for confinement, and now the walls are gone. Let's back up. Because before we talk about what you gain, we need to talk about what you've been told stability actually is. Stability, as most people understand it, is a monthly salary that hits your account on the same day every month. It's a title on a business card, a contract with your name on it, a parking spot, a health plan, a performance review that tells you whether you were good enough this year. And it feels safe. It genuinely does. Because it removes a certain kind of uncertainty, the uncertainty of whether money will come. But here's what no one examines. Stability doesn't remove risk, it just changes its shape. When your entire financial life depends on a single decision made by someone else, a restructuring, a merger, a new director who doesn't like your face, you haven't eliminated risk. You've concentrated it into one single point of failure, and you've outsourced the control of that risk entirely. The safest thing you can do, financially, is never to be that exposed again. And you cannot build that kind of resilience while you're inside the contract. You can't. The contract pays you to stay, not to build, not to expand, to stay. Let me tell you about Renata. Renata was 37 years old and had been with the same company for 11 years. Good company, respected company, the kind of company that gives you a gold pen when you hit 10 years. She got the gold pen. She kept it on her desk, next to the performance review that said she was consistently exceeds expectations. She was. She had always exceeded expectations. The problem was that they were someone else's expectations. Renata had been running a parallel life in her head for 4 years, a consulting practice, her own. She had the expertise, the network, the reputation. She'd even done the math twice. The numbers worked. Under conservative projections, they worked. But every time she got close to the decision, the same calculation ran automatically in her mind. What if it doesn't work? What will I say at Christmas dinner? What does it mean about me if I fail? Notice what's not in that calculation. She never once asked, what does it mean about me if I succeed? What does it mean if I spend another 11 years exceeding someone else's expectations and never find out what I could build on my own? That asymmetry, the way we weigh the cost of failure against the cost of inaction, is the most expensive cognitive bias most people never examine. Renata stayed 2 more years. Then the company was acquired. Her role was eliminated. She received a generous severance package, and she built the consulting practice. In 18 months, she earned more than she had in any 2 years combined at the company. But here's the number that actually matters. She didn't find that out until she was forced to. Forced by someone else's decision about her. Everything she gained, she could have had 4 years earlier. But her nervous system wasn't willing to choose what it was eventually willing to survive. Think about that. So what do you actually gain when you leave stability? Not the Instagram version, the real version. The first thing you gain is authorship. This sounds abstract until you experience its absence. Authorship is the experience of your results being directly connected to your decisions. When you're inside a large structure, that connection is diffuse, mediated by layers of bureaucracy, politics, timing. You do excellent work, and someone else decides whether it matters. Outside the contract, the connection is direct. Terrifyingly direct. You build something, it either works or it doesn't, and both outcomes tell you something true about what you did. That feedback loop, that raw, unmediated connection between your judgment and your results, is something you cannot Buy. You can only earn it by being exposed to it, and it changes you in a way that nothing inside a salary structure ever will. The second thing you gain is a new relationship with money. Inside the salary, money is something that happens to you once a month. You receive it, you distribute it, you wait for the next cycle. The entire relationship is passive. You are a consumer of income. Outside the salary, money becomes something you generate, and when you generate it, something fundamental shifts in how you understand it. You start to see the connection between value created and value received. You start to understand, for the first time in your life, that your earning capacity has no ceiling imposed by someone else's budget. The salary had a ceiling, your capability doesn't, but you could never see that from inside the contract, because the contract was designed to hide it from you. The third thing you gain, and this is the one nobody talks about, is the right to fail on your own terms. There is a specific kind of suffering that belongs to people who spent 20 years being excellent in someone else's structure and never found out what they were capable of building for themselves. It's not the suffering of failure. It's the suffering of never having played. When you leave stability, you accept the possibility of failure. Real failure. The kind that costs money, that costs time, that costs pride. But you also accept the possibility of discovery, of finding out what you can actually do when the only person who can save you is you. And that discovery, that hard-earned scar tissue-level knowledge of your own capacity, is the most durable asset any person can own. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but it determines everything on every balance sheet you will ever have for the rest of your life. Now let's talk about the transition itself, because this is where most people collapse before they ever arrive at what they were chasing. The transition from stability to freedom is not a straight line. It doesn't look like the pivot charts in the business books. It looks like a seismograph, spikes and drops and long, terrifying flat lines where nothing seems to be happening. The flat lines are not failure. The flat lines are construction. When Renata was 4 months into her consulting practice and hadn't landed a new client in 3 weeks, she thought she had made a terrible mistake. Every number in her spreadsheet looked wrong. Every unanswered email felt like evidence. And the voice that said, "I could always go back," that voice got very, very loud. What she didn't know, what you can never know while you're inside it, is that those 3 weeks were the weeks her reputation was crystallizing in the market. The emails she had sent were being forwarded. The conversations she had started were being finished by other people about her in rooms she wasn't in. The contract had no equivalent mechanism for this. Inside the salary, if you worked 3 weeks and produced nothing visible, you were underperforming. Outside it, you were compounding. The difference between those who survive the transition and those who retreat isn't talent or capital or timing. It's the ability to hold the line when the feedback is silent. That capacity doesn't come from a course. It doesn't come from a book. It comes from a decision made once, quietly, with full knowledge of the cost, that you are done building someone else's ceiling. One more thing, and this one is uncomfortable. Most people who talk about leaving stability frame it as a story about courage, the brave leap, the hero's journey. It isn't. It's a story about math. The math of staying is real. Predictable income, lower immediate variance, social legibility, a clear story about what you do and why. The math of leaving is also real. Higher variance in the short term, psychological cost, the possibility of failure, the loss of certain kinds of comfort that cannot be replaced by any amount of freedom. Both paths have costs. Neither path is free. The question is not which path is brave. The question is which cost you are more willing to pay, the cost of the risk you choose or the cost of the ceiling you've been assigned. One cost is active. You chose it, you take it, you learn from it. The other cost is passive. It accumulates quietly over years without ever presenting itself as a bill. but it collects. And at some point, in a severance conversation, in a performance review that replaces your name with a number, in a Sunday night that feels indistinguishable from every Sunday night before it, the bill arrives. By then, Renata will have been building for 4 years. The only question is, are you going to wait for the bill, or are you going to choose the cost you actually want to pay? If this conversation is already running somewhere in your life, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And if you're ready to go deeper on the mechanics of how money actually moves when you make this transition, the next video is already there.